I don't know which was better over the weekend, the great semifinal games we had across the state or the gorgeous weather, sunny and 60s for semifinal Saturday. I don't know if we'll ever experience that again. Thank you, Mother Nature. Brad Anderson of 103.9 The Truck, Chase Miller from your live event, and myself, Jody Norstedt, here for Midco Sports, getting you set for Dakota Bowl 29. The championships are set. It's all West Fargo in the 11 AA title bout, with West Fargo taking on Cheyenne. 11A features St. Mary's against Jamestown, Hillsboro-Central Valley, and Kindred will tangle for the 11B crown, while 9-man powers Cavalier and LaMoure-Litchville-Marion play the opening game at 9:10 on Friday. Guys, let's start there in 9B and work our way to the bigger schools. The Lobos were the preseason number one. How about this? After the opening week of the season, no other team received a first-place vote from the media in 9B all season. They've looked untouchable at times. Here's the bracket. Their tough tests have come the past 2 weeks, the toughest ones that they've had. Grant County Flasher scored 22 on them in the quarterfinals, and then last week Bottineau held the Lobos to 20 points, but still lost by 14. For fans who haven't watched the Lobos yet, Chase, what should they expect on Friday morning?
Yeah, you should expect a really good defense. It's only allowed 3 teams so far this season to score against them. You should expect a potent offense led by senior quarterback Corbin Potts, who's awfully good. 28 touchdown passes this year compared to 2 interceptions. Weapons of Bowman and Ness on the outside. Then Lettenmeyer, obviously, at running back. He's a guy who can get 100 to 200 yards in a game, too, rushing. So expect a team that's really salty defensively. Expect a team that has a lot of explosiveness on the offensive side, Jody, and a team that hasn't won a title in a couple decades. So, you got to know that the Lobos are going to be hungry coming into Friday morning's game.
Yeah, just like Brett Wendell last year, Brady Lettenmeyer's picked up right where he left off. 1,500 rush yards, 20-plus touchdowns, 8.5 yards per carry. He's been dynamite. Tate Mart, he had 2 picks last week and a forced fumble in the second half, and they have that turnover belt too, which I'm sure will show up at the Fargo Dome on Friday. The other semifinal was incredible. Back and forth all afternoon between the 2-seed New Salem Almont and 3rd-seeded Cavalier. It goes to overtime. Holstein score, but can't get the 2-pointer. Then Bryson Clem scores on a tremendous second effort on a 4th and goal from the 1, and then gets the 2-point pass to Landon Carter for the win. LaMoure-Litchville-Marion and New Salem got most of the love all season, but did we all forget about Cavalier, Brad? The Tornadoes are going to play in their 3rd straight Dakota Bowl despite a coaching change and the loss of a great senior class over the offseason. What has impressed you most about this Tornadoes team?
Seems like whenever they have to win a game, they've had to. They went unbeaten. They won at Wyndmere-Lidgerwood very early when the Warbirds had more of an arsenal than they did at the end of the year. They were 6-0 that showdown with Mayport CG. They won at Mayville. They survived an upset bid from Surrey, where it was really a defensive slugfest, 14-8 in a 9-man game, and then you go out in New Salem and win. You're kind of waiting for them to, get bounced somewhere along the way, and they've passed every test to this point.
As for the matchup itself, Chase, I'm asking you for the Cavalier recipe to win.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a shootout or if it's going to be a slugfest to what Brad's talking about here, just because Cavalier has shown they can do it both particular ways. I think they have to capitalize on mistakes from the Lobos. Yeah. LaMoure-Litchville-Marion had an early turnover against Bottineau. Bottineau was able to score. However, LaMoure-Litchville-Marion with that firepower came back. So I think early on, at 9 o'clock in the morning game, you don't want to be behind the 8 ball, and Cavalier's been behind the 8 ball against Kidder County 2 years ago, against Linton HMB. If you want to play catch-up against the Lobos, that could be a long afternoon, or I should say long morning in the Fargo Dome.
Is that the concoction for the Lobos? Stay in front and try to win that first title since 1991?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to last week what I said with Lettenmeyer. I think it starts with Lettenmeyer, and if they get the ground game going, then that opens things up for the receivers on the outside. And you mentioned Mart defensively, but some of their linebackers, Steffes, I was really impressed with him when I saw the Lobos earlier in the year. Him and Hebel their tackle numbers are really impressive.
Really good.
Really good.
It's the first meeting, by the way, between these two programs since their first-round meeting in 2019, which was a 44-6 victory for the Tornadoes. Let's chat about 11B. The semifinal games weren't even close. Both Hillsboro-Central Valley and Kindred won by 30-plus. You were in Kindred, Brad. I was too. Mm-hmm. What left you most impressed about the Vikings as they get ready for their first Dakota Bowl appearance in 5 years?
They won the line of scrimmage all day long, and I think they used their depth to their advantage as well. It was 3 and outs for Bowman in the first quarter, and the special teams got it going with the block punt for a safety. McQuillan looks healthy again. He looked really comfortable in the pocket and really, but they won the battle up front with Heinrich and with McQuillan running the football, and defensively were able to provide enough pressure. They got a couple of sacks in the first half, but they did it basically with rushing 3 or 4 guys. It was very similar to what Central Cass had to try and throw into HCV's defense a couple of weeks ago. It was very similar. They made Lardy and crew uncomfortable in the first half.
Yeah, Lardy just having a tough time until that fourth quarter. He finally hits Heimer for a couple of deep shots, but it was too little too late. Chase Scott Olson always has his team locked in come playoff time. They were up 27-0 after one quarter against Bishop Ryan in the semis. What is this team doing offensively that makes them so scary right now?
Well, it's the offensive line play. You know, you talk about football and you talk about a lot of coaches, and for Coach Olson, I think it started with the offensive line play from their first loss against Central Cass, and it's only gotten better. You got his son Riley at quarterback as well. Now he's a savvy vet. He understands how to run that option game and kind of look at the line. You got Jason in the backfield as well, a tailback, and then you got a Limke on the outside that you can throw some darts to. So when I look at Hillsboro-Central Valley, they've hung up 28 or more points in their last 9 games, and they can kind of do a little bit of everything. They play complementary football. You know, they don't put their defense in a bad situation. Their offense normally able to ground out a couple of first downs, and when you do that going up against the Burros, it can make for a long afternoon and you just get hit in the face more times than not, and that's what HCV's been able to do. And
with about 30-plus seniors, I remember Scott Olson being so excited about that back in August. And speaking of back in August, that's when Kindred had a chance to beat Hillsboro-Central Valley and force the Burros into an 0-2 start. Instead, HCV gets a long touchdown run from Jace LeShook and a trio of scores from Cole Hebel to win it 26-20. It was a great game. Trey Heinrich had a couple of rushing scores for Kindred, but is there anything we can really take from a matchup that occurred now 2.5 months ago, Brad?
Well, I mean, it's just kind of the same recipe. I know HCV won the turnover battle, and I was talking to Scott Olson this week, and I said, have you lost the turnover battle at all this year? And they've intercepted 24 passes. And Parker Gallagher has 9 interceptions. Yep. That's a pretty good number. And Cotton had an interception in that game that was key. You mentioned the Leshek long TD run. It was basically kind of those little things there. And they won the battle in the second half and got it to a 2-score lead. I think if one of those teams gets to a 2-score lead, if that does happen on Friday at the Dome, that's got to be tough for either team to come back, because you kind of look, they do a lot of similar things. I mean, they're kind of based a little bit differently, but I think they really, it's pretty much basic football, that they just really basic fundamental football. I think it's kind of like looking in the mirror for both teams.
Yeah, and blue and white too.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
Let's climb the ladder up to 11A, where I expect this to be a really good game. Speaking of blue and white, Jamestown and St. Mary's have been the top dogs in this division all year. They met in the regular season, a 20-7 victory for the Blue Jays back in mid-September, but quite a bit has happened since then. Starting QB, Peyton Hochhalter missed several games for the Blue Jays. They lost 2 of those games. St. Mary's took over the top spot in the rankings, and they carry an 8-game win streak going into the Dakota Bowl. I will say this, though. It wasn't a cakewalk last week against Dickinson. Chase, the Midgets made them earn it.
Well, they really did. They held St. Mary's to under 50 rushing yards in a game, and a Coach Smeeker team, and you say under 50 rushing yards, you feel like you're probably going to come up on the winning side. But, turnovers cost you, and Dickinson had 5 of them in that particular game. If it wasn't for a Felkley kickoff return for a touchdown, 90-plus yards in the third quarter, we might be talking about those Dickinson Midgets use the same formula to beat against Fargo South on the road. A very stingy defense. They almost upended Bismarck St. Mary's, but it's almost like you put them in Penn. You put St. Mary's in the Dakota Bowl in Penn, it feels like the last decade, right? And Jamestown, hey, you know what? How much has changed with that crew from the first time around? We'll find out a little bit later on. But Coach Smeeker, sometimes there's always a game in the playoffs that maybe you shouldn't win, that you win to get to a title game, and that was last weekend for St. Mary's. Last year against Kindred, and this year in the semis against Dickinson.
Yeah, pretty impressive what the Midgets were able to do in the postseason. Meanwhile, the Blue Jays completely dominated North, who lost leading rusher Mason Lockwood early in that contest. Hochhalter passed for 5 touchdowns in the first half alone, 3 of those to Adam Kallenbach. Brad, what makes the Blue Jays offense so effective right now? They've combined for 76 points in the first 2 playoff games.
I think they scored 3 touchdowns in their first 8 plays.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, obviously the big play is part of it, and when the defense has gotten them a turnover, that's led to short fields, and they haven't missed on that. And we kind of learned by watching the Vikings that if you don't capitalize on your mistakes, it's going to come back and bite you at some point.
You really had to bring the Vikings up?
I just like to pick that wound as much as I can. But I think it's basically just come down to that. They've done that 2 weeks in a row. They did it to Red River and they did it to North, where they just pounced on them early. And St. Mary's better be careful. I don't think you're going to be able to assume that Jamestown's going to, turn the ball over, or, make a lot of mistakes early on. And I know Bill Nelson, just kind of reading the story the first time when they beat St. Mary's, that's really what felt his team kind of grew as a program. when they knocked off the Saints the first time.
That was a huge statement. Pick a player that'll be the biggest difference maker in this game. Brad, I'll give you the first pick.
I would say Kallenbach. I think really on both sides of the ball too. I mean, even defensively, but I think Kallenbach for Jamestown, I think, is going to be potentially the X factor.
If Hochhalter plays well, the opposite quarterback, Nick Schumacher, has to play just as well, right? If Felkley can't get the ground game going, you might have to have a quarterback, and Nick there have to throw the ball 20, 25 times. You will have to be efficient against Jamestown's defense.
I will, since you guys are leaving it open, I'll take Felkley because of what he did last week with the explosive kick return. Granted, he did not do much on the ground last week against Dickinson, but if they want to keep Jamestown's offense off the field, Felkley's going to be huge. If Jamestown, on the other side can slow him down like Dickinson did, I say good night, Saints. And I think it's Jamestown rolling to a state championship, which would be pretty impressive for those Blue Jays. We finished the preview with 11 AA, two teams that are no stranger to one another. Players that grew up playing with and against one another in youth leagues. Could you imagine this, though? It's an all West Fargo matchup as the Packers take on the undefeated Sheyenne Mustangs. Brad, I don't think any of us are surprised that Sheyenne is back in this game for a third straight season. Shanley made it interesting for a half in the semifinal, leading 21-14 at the break, but the Mustangs outscored the Deacons 22-0 in the second half to win it. They're 0-2 in the Dakota Bowls, though. This Jeremy Newton Cheyenne team, what do you feel could be different this year about the Mustangs?
I think defensively, it seems like, especially in second halves of the game, I mean, they really took Shanley. They kind of took everything away from Shanley in the second half, and if you can do that with just the bevy of ball carriers they have, led by a working team, that's you might be able to stop that for maybe a couple series here and there, but to do that for 48 minutes is going to be asking a lot.
West Fargo, on the other side, beats Century on the road. And I feel like I kind of felt this one coming. I just didn't think the Patriots had ever reached that same level that they had in previous seasons, and the Packers were a team that was on the rise throughout the year. They got off to that slow start where they lost to Century in Cheyenne, and then all of a sudden they just kept rattling off wins. Chase, the most impressive stat right now for the Packers, though, 0. That's how many points Jay Gibson's team has allowed in the 2 playoff games. How are they doing it?
Well, if you talk to Jay Gibson, he'll say it's been from all 11 guys coming up playing well, but Josh Balstead, right? Their linebackers are just flying everywhere. Balstead at fullback, Balstead at linebackers, making a name for himself, kind of like Carson Hagerly as a junior last year made a name for himself. Josh Balstead is making a name for himself during his junior year right now. The check marks, well, they held Legacy under 200 yards. They held Century under 100 yards, and it's the first time in nearly 100 games that Century has been shut out. You have to go back to 2012 when Bismarck High shut out Bismarck Century. So the check mark was contain Brady Dahl, and they did that. Now the check mark is going to what Brad said earlier, the bevy of running backs, working team. Is it a Hendricks? Who do you have to stop? And it's a different offense, right? In the Veer, 4 or 5 plays you're going to see a lot. I think you got to get ahead of the chains if you're West Fargo, both offensively and defensively, against a very good line play in Cheyenne that doesn't play maybe as many two-way players as West Fargo does, Jody.
Yeah, let's dive into this matchup a little bit more. It was a 28-7 Cheyenne victory back in September. The Mustangs, as we mentioned, they rolled up 300 yards rushing. It was the three-headed monster in that game of Hendricks, Caden Rahr, and the QB, of course, working team. What makes you think West Fargo will have any better luck this time around?
I will say line play and then also play with the lead. If the Packers can get ahead, now we saw Shanley play with the lead in the first half, but West Fargo Cheyenne did what they needed to do. They kept the ball with working team, big day with 4 rushing touchdowns, but if they can play with the lead, play ahead, and take advantage of early opportunities, maybe you start getting in that mind for Cheyenne. They've been here twice. They're the favorites. This reminds me of going back to the state basketball tournament where Cheyenne was the proverbial favorites entering, and West Fargo shut them down in the semifinals. So might we see that again with some similar players from the hard court to the gridiron here, Jody? I think if West Fargo can get out early, and Jay Gibson has never lost a Dakota Bowl game, 6-0 all time, I'll be very curious to see if that streak continues.
And that's part of it. I mean, West Fargo, this coaching staff is pretty much the same as it was in 2017 when they won the state championship. Cheyenne's been on the other end of it, having to suffer those losses, those heartbreaking losses back-to-back years against Century. I think you brought up Josh Balstead, and I think he's been so important to the success of this team. Yes, Parker Nelson has been eating up yards like crazy, held in check a little bit last week against Century, but he's been absolutely on fire. But a huge reason why has been Balstead you watch this guy at fullback. He's so good. You think about all those unheralded guys like, C.J. Ham for the Vikings, or, going back to Jim Kleinsasser if we want a North Dakota tie. He's a guy that's been a lot of fun to watch. But is the mental part anything to do with it for these Cheyenne players that they just haven't been able to get over the hump, Brad?
They're not facing Century this time.
Yeah, right.
The worms kind of turned in the Cheyenne-West Fargo rivalry, because, early on in those first few years, West Fargo beat them pretty handily. But I think shoes on the other foot right now. So I think it's not Century this time around. It's a team they're very familiar with. So I don't know if that plays as big a factor as we might think.
It should be interesting. It's going to be a fun day. 4 big games. Everything kicks off at 9:10 on Friday morning with that 9-man championship game. And just like every year, we'll have extended highlights, reaction coming up at 10:30 on Varsity Sports Live on Friday night. Brad and Chase, two of us got a haircut. Brad and I, for Dakota Bowl week. Chase did not.
Thanks for the text.
But yeah, thank you guys for joining us for the postseason run. Enjoy Dakota Bowl 29, everyone.